Today we're going to be learning about how to make a literature unit for children preschool age. The type of literature unit for children in this particular lesson is based on the philosophy that exposure to vocabulary creates vocabulary-rich children. Children are capable of learning larger words than we give them credit for. And so your task first is to choose a book that is rich in vocabulary. You may have to go through several books in order to find the right book. We're looking for vocabulary that is descriptive, not vocabulary that names things like types of tools or dinosaur names or body parts or things like that. We're looking for vocabulary that is very descriptive. So don't choose things that have simple words like happy, sad, mad, angry, fat, thin, good, bad, large. Those things are too simple for them. We need words that expand their vocabulary. Choose words that will describe things. Choose as many words as necessary, but if you are going through a book and you're finding less than 10 words in the entire book, that's not a vocabulary-rich book. And if you have a book that has more than, say, 25, it may be too difficult for the children. So think about a range of probably 15 to 25 words that you should choose. No less than 15, no more than 25. Once you have your book chosen, and again, you have to choose a real book. You can't just go online and look in an excerpt and use that for this activity. You have to choose a book, and that book has to have 15 to 25 rich vocabulary words. Once you've chosen those words, you're going to use the template. And in the template, you have a category that says vocabulary words from story. You're going to list those words down that column. And the next column, it says child-friendly definitions. So what I want you to do is I want you to look at the word, and then I want you to think of a way that you would describe that to children that makes sense to them. So let's say we chose the word enormous. Enormous to a child means really big. So enormous is the rich vocabulary word, but describing it to a child, really big, is the acceptable way of explaining it to them. Once you have chosen all of those things, I want you to think of ways that you could start conversations using those vocabulary words. Because in this literature unit, if you were using it in your classroom, the goal would be to immerse the children in these words. And so you would find ways to talk about those words, and you would plan ways to talk about those words. So let's say you have the word enormous, and you've read it in the story, and you have explained that it means really big. You might have a conversation starter that says, "Did you see the enormous bird outside our window? Its wings are as big as the table." So it asks a question, it uses the word enormous, and it compares it to something so a child understands that a bird that had wings that spread as wide as the table is something that's really big. And the last part that you're going to be doing is finding an activity that you can use that word in. So again, we have the word enormous. We've explained that it means really big. You see, we have a conversation starter, and then the activity might be the teacher telling the students that we're going to take enormous steps while we walk outside to the playground. And so the teacher mimics enormous steps. She shows what a great, big, giant, enormous step is. And while she's stepping and the children are taking large steps, they're saying, "We're taking enormous steps. We're taking enormous steps." So the purpose of this is to, first of all, expose children to rich vocabulary. Second of all, to have children understand rich vocabulary. Third, to have children interact with it with your help. And last, for them to be able to use that. So while you would use this particular planning document to plan how you would use your literature unit, when you implement it, you would be reading the story to the children for the first time. When you've read the story to the children for the first time, you don't stop and explain the words at all. Another time, maybe later in the day or the next day, you might take the time to go through and talk about the different words and explain them. This story is going to be read to the children throughout the week, so they might have read it 5, 6, 7, 8 times, and then you would put it in the literature center for the children to go through and try to read it themselves, or look at the pictures and read it out loud to themselves as they understand reading. So the purpose again of this activity is for you to plan how you would direct your literature unit. So you're going to choose a story that is rich in vocabulary, that has 15 to 25 very rich words. Remember, stay away from words that label things, like names of tools and dinosaurs and types of things. We want words that describe things or show an action. And then you're going to have a conversation starter, and then you're going to have the activity that uses the word. Now I want to give you an example. In this book, Giraffes Can't Dance, there is a story about Gerald the Giraffe. So on the first page it says, Gerald was a tall giraffe whose neck was long and slim, but his knees were awfully crooked and his legs were rather thin. So for this particular page, I chose the word crooked. I thought it was a descriptive word. The next page said he was very good at standing still and munching shoots off trees. Munching was a descriptive word. But when he tried to run around, he buckled at his knees. Buckled is a descriptive word. Now every year in Africa, they hold the jungle dance, where every single animal turns up to skip and prance. Prance is a descriptive word. So if I were using this in this template, I chose crooked. I would describe crooked as not straight or bent. And then my conversation starter might be, this drawing of a house looks crooked. How can I make it straight? And I would have a picture of a crooked house. And the activity might be to pretend to be crooked trees, make our bodies into crooked trees. The next word I chose was munching. Munching I would describe as eating and crunching, and I might demonstrate it. The conversation starter might be, what kinds of foods do you like to munch? I like to munch on potato chips. And the activity might be to make popcorn for snack and practice munching, and while you're eating the popcorn, talk about munching on popcorn. The next word I chose was buckled. I would describe buckled as bending because something is heavy. So the conversation starter might be, I might have an experiment with something like a piece of paper that I'm holding, and then I'll put blocks on top of it. And I might say, watch what happens to the paper when the blocks go on. The paper buckles. It bends because it's heavy. And so for the activity, I would do that activity, and I would have the children also do that activity. The next word I chose was prance. Prance I would describe as to dance with your knees up high. In the conversation starter, I might say, I saw a horse prance. And the activity would be asking the children to participate with me and to try to prance like a horse when we go outside. And the last word I chose was arrived. You can use different versions of the word. It doesn't have to be just in that particular tense. It can be arrival, arriving, arrived, arrive itself. And I would describe it to be able to get somewhere. And a conversation starter might be, I arrived at school today and nobody was here yet. My activity might be, let's practice arriving at lunch. And then when we get to the lunchroom, we might say, look, we have arrived. Everybody, we arrived at lunch. So the purpose of using these words is to be able to immerse the children in the language, using them whenever you can, exaggerating the words. So going back to the word enormous, you might say, I saw an enormous bird outside. Can you make your arms look enormous? And you kind of exaggerate the words. It puts emphasis on it for the children. It makes it fun to them. It helps them remember.